Okay. So I'm talking to everyone at home right now. Uh, take 10 minutes and talk about what does money represent. Think about coins that you may have on you, dollars in your pocket or in your wallet or in your purse. Talk about what does money represent in your life, in society, broadly or as narrowly as you want to define it. So take 10 minutes to do that. Now let's read a passage of scripture. Let's read together Deuteronomy 14, 22 through 27. And if you need a Bible, this way, I would think. Thanks, Greg. So you may recall from the sermon that I preached this morning that I had explained that in the Old Testament, the way tithing was supposed to work, you would collect your crops, the tithe of your crops, and the firstborn of your herds and flocks, and you'd go to Jerusalem and you'd prepare a meal with them. Was that new for anybody? Like that, when I understood that, first kind of reading the Old Testament and seeing that that's what tithing was, it just opened up the meaning of tithing for me in a new and different way. So that's what's being described here too. This place where so the language that that you were reading, Diane, where it says, "Go to the place that He will choose as a dwelling for His name." Anytime you see that phrase in the book of Deuteronomy, it's referring to Jerusalem. That's what that means. The place where God will choose for His name. That's a way of kind of referring to Jerusalem. So just keep that in mind. So what they're talking about here is taking your tithe to Jerusalem with, as it says in verse 27, the Levite residents in your town. The Levites are the priests. So we're talking about inviting your priest to come with you to go to Jerusalem to have the tithe. Here's what I want you to pay attention to. In verse 24, it says, if the distance is so great that you're unable to transport it, because the place where the Lord your God will choose to set His name is too far away from you, so maybe the shelf life isn't as stable as it needs to be to travel that far, or maybe it's just too much to travel with to go that far, then what does it say that you can do? You may turn it into money. With the money secure in hand, go to the place that the Lord your God will choose. Again, referring to Jerusalem. So what it's saying is, if you can't bring that whole cartload of wine and grain and those 20 different livestock, then exchange them in your town for some currency, and then just bring the currency with you, and then what? Absolutely, yes. With the money secure in hand, go to the place, spend the money for whatever you wish. It doesn't really mean whatever you wish. It doesn't mean if you get to Jerusalem just like, I want a new car, I'm going to get this, I'm going to get that. No, it means whatever you wish as it relates to what you were supposed to bring. Basically, there were storehouses in Jerusalem full of the kinds of food and animals and things for tithes that were a part of tithes and what was needed to, according to the law, fulfill the eating of that meal. And you would go and buy whatever you wanted. So maybe what you had was more grain than wine and a few livestock. Exactly. But you go to Jerusalem and maybe it's like, well, instead of, we had grain, but with our money, I think we want to buy maybe oil, and we'll deep fry some sheep or something like that. You know what I mean? Like basically whatever you want to make out of the food that's prescribed for tithe, just get it with the money that you have. So what does that tell you about changing money in Jerusalem? Is it allowed or not? It's allowed. Yeah, it's actually a part of the law. It tells you, an Israelite, do it. If it's too far, change your tithe into money and then bring your money to Jerusalem and exchange it there for the things that you need. Now, let's read our story again from John chapter 2. So, John chapter 2, verses 13 through 22. So I think the first thing to mention is that Jesus isn't criticizing the fact that they're exchanging money. It's the way that they're doing it, right? So, and we'll unpack that in a little more detail. But I want to point something else out. So what we just read is in John chapter 2. This is the beginning of John's gospel. This is right after Jesus has been baptized and starts his ministry, that he goes into Jerusalem, we're told, John chapter 2, and he cleanses the temple. Now, this story is also in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, but it's at the end of his ministry, like during his triumphal entry, right? So Palm Sunday, he enters into the city, and what's the first thing he does? I kind of imagine Jesus riding the donkey into the city and then just like getting down, kind of like making a beeline right for the temple and goes flipping some tables, right? Like that's how it happens. He enters the city on Palm Sunday and goes right to the temple and cleanses it. And so the question is, why does John have this story at the beginning, but the other Gospels have it at the end? Are they the same event that John is just kind of putting a little earlier because he's trying to tell, he wants to point a detail out in a different way? Or, and you know, the other gospel writers, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, are doing it at the end because of a reason of their own? Or are these different events? Scholars make arguments one way or the other. I happen to think that these are different events. And I actually think that these may not have been the only times Jesus did this. I think this is the sort of thing that Jesus did when he'd go to Jerusalem for like the high holy days, and he would see this happening. You'll notice in our version here, John chapter 2, all he says is, take these things out of here, stop making my Father's house a marketplace. Now, that's pretty harsh, but it's also kind of tame, given what he says in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. He says, this is a den of robbers. Woo, that is a little more harsh, and you can see why saying something like that would inevitably lead to Good Friday, right? Like maybe people could tolerate like the things that Jesus was saying before, but he's calling them thieves now. This is a den of thieves, a den of robbers. People could say that's the last straw. We got to get rid of this guy. Go ahead.
But maybe it makes it more understandable about why he was doing this in Matthew, Mark, and Luke.
Yes.
Because in John, it doesn't say because they were overpricing things or whatever.
Yeah.
They weren't. He's not saying they were robbers. Where in the other versions, you understand why he was doing this, because they were doing something that was wrong.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, it is interesting. And I think too, we get these moments in the life of Jesus where, I mean, he spends most of his time in Galilee, right, near the Sea of Galilee, which is fairly far from Jerusalem. And yet, we're told on occasion that some religious leaders from Jerusalem were going to Galilee to confront him. Why in the world would the religious leaders of Jerusalem care about what Jesus was doing in Galilee unless they knew about him by reputation? And I think, I can't prove this, but I think it's because he would do things like go into the temple marketplace or the where they were doing the money changing, and he was getting whips and flipping things over and saying, get out of here. And they're saying, here's this Jesus guy again. Every Passover, he comes and does this, and we got to go find a way to take care of him. And so they'd go find him where he was in Capernaum or in Nazareth or wherever, and he'd be confronted by them. So Jesus perhaps does this sort of thing regularly or on occasion, more than once. And that should tell us something about him. Like I like my gentle Jesus, meek and mild, but this is also the same Jesus who is flipping tables and doing dramatics and theatrics and this sort of thing. I mean, can you just imagine? You're just a normal everyday worshiper uh, in the temple. You're just there, you're just there with your money in your hand, waiting in line, you know, gradually getting closer to the head of the line, and you finally get there, and you'll say, "Yep, I want a sheep and half a pound of flour," and and you order your thing. Like you're just waiting there and you got your priest with you and all of this. You just want to have your tithe meal. You're waiting in line, and all of a sudden, here's Jesus flipping tables over and chasing the doves out. I mean, what if you had been the person at the front of the line and you had just paid for your dove and they're going to get your dove and then Jesus is like letting it go? I mean, that is very possible something that had happened. And sometimes I think when it matters the most to Jesus, he doesn't care that much about being polite. Do you know what I mean? When it matters the most, he cares about doing what's right. And if that means making a scene sometimes, he's okay doing that. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Um, so I want to show us some pictures here that kind of help maybe put this into perspective. Craig, I can give you these files too. Would that be helpful? Or are you just gonna we can just do it this way too? Um, so if you've ever been to Jerusalem, there is at the Israel Museum, there is an outdoor display, a scale model of first century Jerusalem. And this is part of the scale here, or this is part of the model, and this is Herod's temple. Here's something you need to understand about Herod. This building project was unheard of in the ancient world. There's an ancient historian. His name is Flavius Josephus, who traveled with the Emperor Vespasian, and the emperor commissioned him to write a history of the Jewish people. And so he was traveling all over the Roman Empire with the emperor, seeing all of the impressive architecture that Rome had built over centuries, over decades. Things like the Colosseum. And do you know what he said? Nothing was as impressive as Herod's temple. And Herod was just like a self-absorbed narcissist who needed to do things big or he didn't want to do them at all. And what you see here, so what is the actual temple? That's the actual temple. This is the temple complex. And what these walls are here are really just retaining walls, because Herod's plan was too big for the site itself. He basically said to his architects, his engineers, "This is what I want to do," and they said, "We can't do it. Like the landscape doesn't support it." And he said, "Find a way to do it." And so they had to build these massive retaining walls here. The Western Wall that people go to, that Jews go to, and pray in front of, is not actually a wall of the temple itself. It's one of the retaining walls. It's the Western Wall. So orient yourself. That's west. This is north. And so it's actually a part of the retaining wall. Like you can't see it. It's the it's the ground level portion of this wall here that still remains, and that's what they go to, the Western Wall. This right here is something called the Royal Stoa. This was where the marketplace was. This is where the money changing happened. There's probably also priests' offices and things inside. I mean, it was an administrative center kind of thing. Um, but um, but this right here is called the Court of the Gentiles. Anybody could go in there. You didn't have to be a Jew. You could be a Gentile and you could go in there. This is the Court of the Women. In other words, this is where only Jews could go, but you could be a man or a woman and be allowed in here. Inside of here was just for men, and then inside was just for priests. Like you couldn't go in there. But this is the court of the Gentiles. So this is a bustling place. People could be going in and out and all of this to see Herod's impressive architecture. What I'm trying to do right now is get you to see what Jesus was seeing. So when he comes to the temple complex, what is he seeing? He's seeing like this says more about Herod than it says about God. That this took over 46 years to build, and that was unheard of in the ancient world. Yeah, it could be. It could be that this area up here there could be some animals. But here's the next thing I want you to see too. That's kind of related to that. You see how like there's a walkway on this upper part. How do you get up there? Do you see any stairs? There aren't any stairs. Once you're in the court of the Gentiles, you can't get up to the royal stoa. The only way to get up to the royal stoa is, sorry, I'm going to make this as visible as possible here. Yeah, yeah. Is this gigantic overarch walkway. So this is the ground level here. You had to walk up. This is as like big as a like 4-lane highway. And you had to descend these stairs just to get up to the Royal Stoa. You couldn't get there any other way. And so here's Jesus. Just imagine this. Jesus is going into the marketplace. He has to ascend this like gigantic highway of a staircase all the way up to this place, and then inside is what he sees. Let me show you. This is an artistic depiction, which I think is actually really, really good. Yeah, this one. Yes. So do you see, like, look how, like, to scale of the people? Again, this is the Royal Stoa up here. Here is the gigantic stairway. Look at that. It has to arch over space to get people into the marketplace. And so this is where Jesus is. He's going up and he's going inside. Is that all that it is for him, though? Is it just that this is obscenely large and says more about Herod and what he thinks of himself than it does of God? I mean, I think that's definitely a part of it. On the other hand, and this gets back to the point of exploitation that was happening. We know historically there was a rabbi, Rabbi Simeon, a generation after the time of Jesus, who was the son of the Rabbi Gamaliel. And if you know the name Gamaliel, it's because he's in our New Testament. He was a member of the Sanhedrin, the Supreme Court of Judaism, and he was also Paul's mentor and teacher, the Apostle Paul's teacher. And his son, Rabbi Simeon, we have a historical record of him saying to the Sanhedrin, hey, we need to pass a law for our people to bring the price of doves back into a reasonable price. And do you know what he suggested? That they need to mark it down by 99% in order to bring it back into a reasonable price. So in other words, they had been marking things up 99%. Like that's not a pie sale for Habitat for Humanity. That is, you know what? People need access to God, and they have to come through us, and they can't do this thing that they're obligated to do unless they exchange money with us. We're just going to mark things up by 99%. This is obscene. And I think what Jesus sees when he comes into the royal stoa here and he sees them changing money and selling doves and all of what they're doing, it's not that they're selling things, it's that he's looking around and this is it's a display of power is what it is. And it's not God's power, it's Herod's power. And what Herod cared about was Rome's power. And they're marking up the price of these things that people need. They can't worship unless they get this. And it's marked up 99%. Sure. Yeah. So just imagine if people were saying you can't pray to God unless you buy gas from us, right? I mean, we're getting close then to kind of what's happening here. Um, I want to see if we can bring this back into focus here. Why does the church exist? Does it exist for itself? To perpetuate itself? To just kind of stay around for as long as possible? Or is there something bigger? I like what the English archbishop and theologian William Temple once said when he was quoted as saying, "The church exists primarily for the sake of those who are still outside it." Just think about that. The church exists primarily for the sake of those who are still outside it. What do you think that means? The tithe and what it was for. I was mentioning this in my children's sermon that when God says, "Bring me the tithe is mine," you would think that, I mean, just imagine this if you can kind of get there in your mind. You know, God taking the tithe and sort of just putting it in his pocket, right? Like, because it's mine, like it belongs to me. But that's not what God does. God says, bring me the tithe, it's mine. And now that you've brought it to me, do with it what I want, which is to help all those people out there. And it's like the perfect metaphor for me. Like the tithe meal is the perfect metaphor for the church. And what I think Archbishop Temple is saying here, that it doesn't exist for us, it exists for the people who are kind of on the outside. And who was on the outside for Israel? What did it mean to be a part of Israel? It meant to be one of the tribes, to kind of be integrated into the society, and like that's what it meant to be a part of the community of faith. But for widows and orphans and immigrants and refugees, like that was not possible. But the tithe brought them in, right? Like that's the purpose of it. So let's see if we can do this in maybe 2 minutes here. we started off by talking about what does money represent, and we came up with things like security, prosperity, greed, poverty, income, comfort, purchase power, legal tender value, trade, time, nothing, power. How can we translate what we've been talking about over to some of this language here? How can the church exist for the security and comfort and time of people out in the world that aren't a part of the church? I don't know. I don't know if that question makes sense. But can you think about that? I guess, for example, what would it mean for the church to be invested in the security of those outside the church? Yeah, absolutely. Meeting their food and clothing needs or any need. Um, absolutely. I think that's what I think that's exactly what that means. What about time? That's an interesting one. What if what if someone's need was I can't do this important thing for my kids because I don't have the time? What if the church showed up and said, "Well, how can we make more time for you? Can we fold your laundry? Can we cut your grass? Can we?" Yeah, I guess what I'm asking you to think about here is to think about how mission is integral to what the church's identity is. The church is by nature a community that reaches out, and without that reaching out, we kind of have ceased to be the church, right? So mission must be of utmost importance for us to retain the identity that we see in scripture and that we see Jesus giving to us. Any final comments before we close? Thank you for each other. Thank you that through one another we are able to discern your voice